Welcome to The Faithful Home. Tonight, we enter one of the most enduring stories in Scripture. Our story is found primarily in the book of Exodus, chapters 1 through 14, with reflections later echoed in Hebrews chapter 11 and Acts chapter 7. This is the story of Moses. But before he was a leader, before he stood before Pharaoh, before the sea ever parted, he was a man living in quiet obscurity. 40 years had passed since he fled Egypt. Once, Moses had lived surrounded by marble and gold, raised in Pharaoh's household, educated in the language of rulers, trained in administration, warfare, diplomacy. He understood power. Yet even in the palace, he carried a secret history. He was born Hebrew, born under a decree of death. Pharaoh had ordered every Hebrew baby boy to be cast into the Nile. Fear of multiplication had turned into violence. Moses survived because of courage. His mother placed him in a basket among the reeds. His sister watched from a distance. Pharaoh's daughter found him, and compassion overcame politics. He was raised by the very empire that had enslaved his people. Perhaps he always knew he did not fully belong. And one day, when he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, something inside him refused silence. He struck the Egyptian. He buried him in the sand. It was his act of intervention. But it was also rash. The next day, when he tried to break up a dispute between two Hebrews, one of them asked, "Who made you ruler and judge over us?" The question cut deep. His identity was exposed, his authority rejected, his act known. When Pharaoh heard, Moses fled, and so began 4 decades of desert life. The wilderness reshapes a man. There are no palaces there, no applause, no urgency, only wind, sand, sheep. He married Zipporah. He had sons. He learned the patience of tending flocks. Day after day, the horizon remained unchanged. There is something humbling about caring for sheep. They wander easily. They startle quickly. They require steady guidance. Perhaps without realizing it, Moses was being trained. But at the time, it likely felt like exile. The dreams of youth had faded. The memory of Egypt softened by time. The urgency to rescue his people quieted by routine. And then, on an ordinary day, not marked by prophecy, not preceded by a vision, something interrupted the silence. He led the flock toward Horeb, the mountain of God. And there he saw it, a bush on fire. The desert sun already burns hot, and flames are not unfamiliar in dry places. But this was different. The bush burned, yet it did not turn to ash. The branches held, the leaves remained. The fire was alive, but it did not destroy. Moses could have kept walking. He could have reasoned it away. But he chose to turn aside. "I will go over and see this strange sight," he said. Curiosity opened the door. And when the Lord saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him from within the bush, "Moses, Moses." The repetition was not distant, it was personal. "Here I am," Moses answered. "Do not come any closer," the voice said. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Holy ground, not marble floors, not temple courts, desert dust. The wilderness had become sacred. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Moses hid his face. He was afraid to look at God, and the voice continued, "I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out. I know their suffering. Seen, heard, known, not ignored. So I have come down to rescue them." Rescue. The word must have stirred something buried in Moses. But then the sentence turned. "So, now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt." The past returned. Egypt, The palace, the accusation, the fear, the escape. He had built a quiet life. Now the quiet was ending. Moses answered honestly, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh?" He did not ask, "Why?" He asked, "Who am I?" 40 years earlier, he had tried to act as deliverer. It ended in rejection. The question carried memory. The answer did not focus on Moses' qualifications. "I will be with you." Presence, not prestige. But Moses was not satisfied. "If I go to the Israelites and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I tell them?" Names matter. They reveal identity. And God said, "I am who I am. Tell them, I am has sent me to you. Self-existent, uncontained, not defined by circumstance." Still, Moses hesitated. What if they do not believe me? Signs were given. His staff became a serpent. His hand became diseased, then restored. The ordinary became extraordinary. But fear does not vanish easily. "I am not eloquent," Moses said. "I am slow of speech." Perhaps he feared standing before Pharaoh's polished court. Perhaps desert silence had made him uncertain of his voice. The reply came firm. "Who gave human beings their mouths? Now go. I will help you speak." And yet Moses said, "Please send someone else." The request revealed the depth of reluctance. The Lord provided Aaron. Partnership would support obedience, and so Moses returned to Egypt. The land had not softened. Pharaoh still ruled. Slavery still crushed. When Moses and Aaron stood before him and declared, "Let my people go," Pharaoh answered, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him?" Power rarely yields willingly. Instead, oppression increased. Straw was withheld from the Hebrew workers, yet their brick quota remained. Exhaustion deepened, and the people blamed Moses. "May the Lord judge you," they said. "You have made us obnoxious to Pharaoh." Calling had brought conflict. Moses cried out, "Why have you brought trouble on this people?" The deliverer now felt like the cause of pain, but the Lord said, "Now you will see what I will do." And so the plagues began. The Nile turned to blood. The source of life became undrinkable. Frogs filled houses and beds. Gnats and flies covered land and skin. Livestock died. Boils broke out. Hail shattered crops. Each plague confronted Egypt's sense of control. Darkness fell for 3 days, a darkness so heavy it could be felt. Yet Pharaoh's heart hardened. Again and again. Sometimes pride chooses suffering over surrender, until one final night approached, a night unlike the others. Each Hebrew household was instructed to sacrifice a lamb, to mark their doorposts, to eat in readiness, sandals on feet, staff in hand, prepared to move. At midnight, grief spread across Egypt, and Pharaoh summoned Moses. "Leave," he said, "not as a negotiation, as a release." The Israelites left quickly, their bread unrisen, their belongings gathered in haste. Gold and silver were given to them. After generations of bondage, departure felt unreal. They walked into the desert, not yet free from fear, but moving. Freedom is fragile in its first moments. Pharaoh reconsidered. "What have we done?" he asked. Chariots were prepared. The Israelites saw dust rising behind them. Ahead lay the sea. Behind them, an army. Fear rose quickly. "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us here to die?" Memory of slavery suddenly felt safer than the uncertainty of freedom. Moses answered, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm. Stand firm. Not fight. Not flee. Stand." The pillar of cloud moved between them and Egypt. Darkness for one side, light for the other. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. A strong east wind blew all night. The waters parted slowly. The seabed appeared. Walls of water rose. Imagine the sound of wind and water, the tremor in their steps, families walking between towering waves, children holding tightly. The army followed, confident in speed and steel. But when the last Israelite reached the shore, Moses stretched out his hand again. The sea returned. The chariots vanished beneath the waves. Silence followed. The threat was gone. Miriam began to sing. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Freedom was visible, but the journey had just begun. On the far shore, relief settled slowly. The sea was calm again. The desert wind continued as it always had. Nothing in the landscape revealed what had just occurred. If someone had arrived the next morning, they would have seen only sand and water. Yet everything had changed. For generations, the Israelites had known only one rhythm: work, exhaustion, fear. Now they stood without chains. But freedom can feel disorienting. Slavery dictates structure. Freedom requires trust. They had left Egypt quickly. There had been no time to plan routes, no time to gather supplies beyond what they could carry. Children walked beside elders. Livestock moved with them. Possessions balanced on shoulders. Behind them lay certainty, however cruel. Before them lay promise, undefined, distant. Moses stood among them, not elevated above them. He did not glow with triumph. He was still the same man who had argued at a burning bush, the same man who had asked, "Who am I?" Deliverance had not transformed his personality. It had confirmed his obedience. Leadership often looks less like confidence and more like persistence. The people watched the water settle. They watched the sun rise. And in that moment between danger and journey, worship emerged, not organized, not rehearsed, spontaneous. Gratitude often surfaces after survival. I will sing to the Lord, Moses declared. The word carried through the desert air. Miriam took a tambourine. Women followed her with dancing. Joy moved through the camp. But celebration does not erase human frailty. Within days the wilderness pressed in. Water grew scarce. Thirst sharpened tempers. When they reached Marah and found the water bitter, hope quickly turned to complaint. What are we to drink? The memory of the sea faded quickly. Miracles remembered feel distant when discomfort returns. Moses cried out again, and provision came. The water became drinkable. Further into the wilderness, hunger rose. The people longed for the food of Egypt. It would have been better to die there, they said. It is remarkable how quickly the past can appear softened when the present is difficult. They remembered bread. They forgot chains. Again provision came. Manna in the morning, quail in the evening, daily bread, enough for each day, not stored in abundance, not hoarded. Trust renewed every sunrise. The wilderness revealed something essential. Freedom is not only escape from oppression, it is learning dependence. In Egypt, their survival was tied to forced labor. In the desert, survival was tied to daily trust. And Moses learned alongside them. He had once tried to deliver by force. Now he delivered by obedience. He had once acted in anger. Now he waited for instruction. The desert did not only free the people, it refined their leader. Every complaint, every fear, every moment of doubt, it shaped him. He stood between the people and the Lord, interceding, listening, responding. He was no longer the impulsive prince. He was becoming a shepherd in truth. Shepherds guide slowly. They do not drive from behind. They walk ahead. And so the journey continued. The sea behind them. The mountain ahead. The promise still unfolding. When we look back at this story, it is easy to focus on the dramatic moments. The burning bush. the plagues, the sea parting. But much of this story unfolds in quieter movements. A man turning aside to look, a hesitant voice saying, "Here I am." A reluctant return to a place of fear, a staff lifted over water. Freedom often begins, not with spectacle, but with attention. Moses did not plan to encounter God that day. He simply noticed something different. He turned aside. There are moments in life when the sacred appears in ordinary landscapes, not always with fire, sometimes with a question, sometimes with an interruption, and the response determines the path. Moses resisted. He questioned. He doubted. He asked for someone else to go. And yet, he went. Faith is rarely the absence of hesitation. It is movement despite it. The Israelites feared at the sea. They panicked. They accused. Yet they walked between the waters. Courage is not loud. Sometimes it is simply the next step. The sea did not part days in advance. It parted when obedience stretched out a hand. The wilderness did not provide stored abundance. It provided daily bread. Dependence replaced control. And that may be the deeper miracle. Power confronted power in Egypt. But in the desert, something quieter formed. A people learning identity. A leader learning trust. A nation discovering that freedom requires faithfulness. Moses would not see the full promise fulfilled. His story would continue through mountains and law, through failure and intercession. But in this chapter, he learned something essential. That calling often arrives after long silence. That weakness does not disqualify. That reluctance can coexist with obedience, and that the God who sees and hears also acts. Tonight, as we rest in this story, we remember. The bush burned, but it was not consumed. The sea stood, but it did not overwhelm. The desert stretched wide, but it did not erase promise. Between palace and wilderness, between slavery and song, between fear and faith, there was a man who turned aside, and because he did, history changed. The wind that once blew across parted waters now moves quietly again. The sand settles, the sea rests, but the story remains. A reminder that sometimes, when the path seems closed, the way opens only after we step forward. And so we leave Moses and the people on the far shore, not finished, not perfected, but free, and beginning again.